You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K.
Children's DNA in criminal databases. ASUS routers get an unwanted houseguest. New APT41 malware uses Google Calendar for command and control. Interlock ransomware gang deploys new Trojan. Estonia issues arrest warrant for suspect in massive pharmacy breach. The enemy within the endpoint. New England hospitals disrupted by cyberattack. Tim Starks from CyberScoop is discussing whatever we did was not enough. How Salt Typhoon slipped through the government's blind spots. And Victoria's secrets are leaked. Today is May 29th, 2025. I'm T-Minus Space Daily host Maria Varmazes in for Dave Bittner, and this is your CyberWire Intel Briefing. Happy Thursday, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Let's get into today's Intel Briefing. Between 2020 and 2024, U.S. Customs and Border Protection collected DNA samples from over 133,000 migrant children, including at least one as young as 4 years old, and uploaded their genetic profiles to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, which is a database traditionally reserved for criminal offenders. This expansion of biometric surveillance, justified by the Department of Justice as a crime prevention measure, has raised significant privacy and ethical concerns. While official policy limits routine DNA collection to individuals aged 14 and older, exceptions were widely made, often without any criminal charges. Notably, 122 minors identified as U.S. citizens had their DNA collected, 53 of whom were not detained for any criminal arrest. Critics argue that this practice blurs the line between civil immigration enforcement and criminal investigation, effectively treating undocumented migrants, especially children, as potential criminals. Privacy experts warn that storing raw DNA samples indefinitely poses risks of misuse, including unauthorized profiling and surveillance. The inclusion of minors in CODIS, a system designed for tracking criminal offenders, underscores the need for stringent oversight and clear guidelines to protect vulnerable populations from unwarranted surveillance. Gray Noise has uncovered a sophisticated campaign compromising over 9,000 ASUS routers, primarily targeting small office and home office environments. The attackers gain initial access through brute force attacks and authentication bypasses, including techniques not yet assigned CVEs. Subsequently, they exploit CVE 2023-39780, a command injection vulnerability, to execute arbitrary commands. The adversaries establish persistence by enabling SSH access on a non-standard port and inserting their public SSH keys using legitimate ASUS configuration methods. These changes are stored in non-volatile memory, or NVRAM, allowing the backdoor to survive reboots and firmware updates. Notably, no malware is deployed. Instead, the attackers disable logging and security features like Trend Micro's AI protection to evade detection. Google's threat intelligence group says the Chinese threat actor APT41 used a compromised government website to host a new strain of malware dubbed Tough Progress. Notably, the malware uses Google Calendar events for command and control communications. Google explains, once executed, Tough Progress creates a 0-minute calendar event at a hard-coded date, specifically May 30th, 2023, with data collected from the compromised host being encrypted and written in the calendar event description. The operator places encrypted commands in calendar events on July 30th and 31st, 2023, which are predetermined dates also hard-coded into the malware. Tough Progress then begins polling calendar for these events. When an event is retrieved, the event description is decrypted, and the command it contains is executed on the compromised host. Results from the command execution are encrypted and written back to another calendar event. The Interlock ransomware gang is using a new Trojan dubbed Node Snake to target universities, according to a report from Bleeping Computer. The malware is distributed via phishing emails with malicious links or attachments. Quorum Cyber has published a report on the rat, noting that the malware is encoded in JavaScript and executed with Node.js. The researchers state that Node Snake demonstrates typical capabilities expected from a modern-day rat. It is designed for persistent access, system reconnaissance, and remote command execution. It employs multiple evasion techniques, communicates with command and control servers via HTTP/HTTPS, and deploys secondary payloads to maintain control and facilitate further compromise. Quorum observed Node Snake deployed against 2 universities in the UK within the last 2 months. Estonian authorities have issued an international arrest warrant for a Moroccan national accused of hacking a customer card database belonging to Allium UPI, which is a major provider of pharmacy and healthcare products across the Baltic countries, according to a report from The Record. The breach occurred in February 2024 and exposed nearly 700,000 personal identification codes used by pharmacy customers, revealing pharmacy purchases linked to customer accounts. The incident affected data belonging to almost half of the Estonian population. Estonia's Central Criminal Police alleges that 25-year-old Adrar Khalid gained access to the database using a stolen password for an administrator account. In mid-2024, Israeli cybersecurity company Signia uncovered a sophisticated North Korean cyber attack involving a threat actor posing as a legitimate IT employee at a Western company. The attacker, operating from within the organization, used standard tools like Zoom and basic network protocols to avoid detection. By leveraging access through a corporate VPN and a company-issued laptop, the attacker established a multi-layered covert control channel, enabling lateral movement, execution of malicious code, and data exfiltration, all under the guise of routine remote work activities. Signia's investigation began after the FBI recovered a client-issued laptop during a raid on a suspected laptop farm, which is a service that facilitates foreign workers impersonating U.S. citizens to secure remote roles in Western companies. Shoham Simon, Signia's senior VP of Cyber Services, emphasized that the breach exploited a trust vulnerability rather than a code flaw, highlighting the need for detection models that account for anomalies in protocol usage and the misuse of legitimate tools. A cyber incident affecting Massachusetts-based health system Covenant Health is disrupting several affiliated hospitals in New England, according to WMUR. News Center Maine reports that St. Joseph Healthcare in Bangor and St. Mary's Hospital in Lewiston were both impacted, and St. Joseph's has attributed the disruption to a cyber attack. WMUR says St. Joseph's Hospital in Nashua, New Hampshire, is diverting ambulances to different hospitals. Coming up after the break, Dave Bittner sits down with Tim Starks, senior reporter at CyberScoop. They'll unpack his recent piece called "Whatever We Did Was Not Enough: How Salt Typhoon Slipped Through the Government's Blind Spots." Plus, what's the story behind Victoria's secrets getting leaked? Well, stick around.
And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. Identity is the new battleground, and attackers are exploiting stolen identities to infiltrate your organization. Traditional defenses can't keep up. SpyCloud's holistic identity threat protection helps security teams uncover and automatically remediate hidden exposures across your users, from breaches, malware, and phishing to neutralize identity-based threats like account takeover, fraud, and ransomware. Don't let invisible threats compromise your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what attackers already know. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. Compliance regulations, third-party risk, and customer security demands are all growing and changing fast. Is your manual GRC program actually slowing you down? If you've ever found yourself drowning in spreadsheets, chasing down screenshots, or wrangling manual processes just to keep your GRC program on track, you're not alone. But let's be clear, there is a better way. Vanta's trust management platform takes the headache out of governance, risk, and compliance. It automates the essentials, from internal and third-party risk to consumer trust, making your security posture stronger, yes, even helping to drive revenue. And this isn't just nice to have. According to a recent analysis from IDC, teams using Vanta saw a 129% boost in productivity. That's not a typo, that's real impact. So, if you're ready to trade in chaos for clarity, check out Vanta and bring some serious efficiency to your GRC game. Vanta, GRC, how much easier trust can be. Get started at vanta.com/cyber. From time to time, a piece of reporting cuts through the noise and lays bare not just the breach, but a breakdown, a systemic failure that affects national security, industry trust, and how we define public-private partnership in the digital age. And that is exactly what Tim Stark's recent coverage at CyberScoop has done, with a deep dive into Salt Typhoon. We're going to dig into that together today. Tim, welcome. It is always great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be back, and thanks for the kind words.
Yeah. So let's start off with what prompted you to pursue this story. There's a lot here.
So it was actually, there's my story, and then there's a second story that my colleague Derek Johnson did, but they both stem from the same idea, which is our editor, Greg Otto, said that he was flummoxed by the notion that the government officials have been saying, we're not sure that Salt Typhoon will ever exit the telecommunications networks that were part of the biggest breach, arguably ever, of the industry by those Chinese hackers. And so he wanted us to explore how that could be and why that could be. And in starting from that premise, we broke it out into me deciding to take a deep dive on what the government did or did not do well, in the ways that might have allowed Salt Typhoon to get into the systems, and what made it hard for them to get rid of them, and what didn't go well about the government's response in the eyes of the people who were critical of it. And then Derek's piece, I'm sure we're going to talk about less, but I just want to encourage people to read it too, is about what the telecommunications sector did that may have led to this happening and worsened it once it did happen. So that's where it started, and this is where we ended.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into it from the beginning. Your story outlines how, is it correct to say that the telecom companies were surprised and disappointed at the way and where the messaging came from on this one?
Certainly a good number of them were. The way we started the story was just to say there were a number of large companies, I said some, that first heard about this from an article in the Wall Street Journal. If you're talking about the public-private partnership that we've all been talking about for decades, and the government has detected this intrusion, and the victims don't know about it from the government, they're upset. But then also, it was a kind of an interesting dynamic where just on the notifications piece, because there are several pieces of this, just on the who found out about it, when and from whom, there was also the issue of starting off with too little is what some of the complaints were, and then ending up with too much. So, one of the things we dive into deeper in the story is about what kind of effort there was to notify victims and how that played out and who was in charge of it. But at least one telecom industry source pointed out to me that there was a little bit of a, to use their phrase, puppies piling on phenomenon, where after they got notifications that they were victims, they were getting calls from too many agencies and getting too much demands for this and that while they were trying to mitigate. So it was this kind of multifaceted before, after, during problem. I do think that, to the government's credit, there was at minimum an effort to address this, and there was a diligent effort to address this and try to do it differently than they've done it in the past. But that doesn't mean that the outcome satisfied all the players. I mean, even the CISA official I talked to on background pointed out that, when the Wall Street Journal came out, we heard from industry. They were not happy.
Well, let's talk about the government response. As you say, you spoke to a number of people in government and granted some of them anonymity so that they could speak more freely. How do they self-assess the way that this went down?
Whenever you're talking to people you're writing something critical about them and they potentially can be on the defensive, I think what their assessment was that we didn't get everything perfect. I talked to someone who was in the government during the time that this was happening. That person explained a lot of the things that they did to try to respond to this. But the quote, that's in the headline is, whatever we did, it wasn't enough, because they didn't stop it. So that's a realistic appraisal. That was a former person. A current person, said, look, we think we did a good job. The government discovered this early Salt Typhoon activity. And without us, would the victims even know that it was there? Fair point. Of course, there's counterpoints to that too that we can discuss. But also ultimately they were of the mind that, hey, this could have been done better. Even though we tried hard, the victim notification still could have gone better. And then you start to get into people who are in the government now, like Christine Ohm has been making the point as head of DHS that yes, they did discover this intrusion, but they didn't really know how it came to be and what to do about it. And I talked to some people who were critical of that element of it. That, okay, yes, CISA, through their threat hunters, discovered this in government networks. Why didn't that sound bigger alarms? Why didn't that cause more activity, not just on the victim notification front, but on other things? And then, of course, there are the questions of things like the beforehand. Did they, there were vulnerabilities that were known here, but did they target those notifications to the communities that needed them most? Did they directly interact with telecoms, and why didn't they? It's a big, complicated story that breaks down some of these things. And however much you want to go into what parts of that next, I'm ready to go. But it's a sweeping story about the ways in which all of this unfolded.
How do you break down who ultimately bears responsibility here? I mean, has there been much finger pointing?
There has been much finger pointing, yeah. One of the cool things about the story, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm almost like talking up the story too much, but I'm here to talk about it. One of the cool things about the story that I have anything to do with was the art that's attached to it, which does have, some visible finger pointing. You'll recall that in real time, Ann Neuberger, who was the White House national security official, who was lead on cyber, had said these were basic vulnerabilities that the telecommunications sector had, or that their supply chain had, and they weren't addressed. Basic hygiene didn't happen. So I think you can definitely point the finger at telecoms here. I think you can point the finger at the government about how they handled it and whether they responded as best they could have, whether they should have done more. Certainly, you can blame the hackers. It was funny. I was talking to somebody about these two stories, and someone asked about why wasn't there a third? You got to have three in a series, right? And I was like, who else would you blame? I'm like, well, the hackers. I mean, they were clever. They targeted an industry that, you can make the case that some people did in my story, that had been getting a little bit neglected because of this is something even people who were in the government at the time conceded, that they were focused on the people who were really desperately in need, the people who were really far behind. And the thought was the telecom sector was further ahead. That may have well have been true. but the telecom sector has vulnerabilities too. There was a section of this that we kind of left on the cutting room floor, which was, size in cyber is both a valuable thing to have and a dangerous thing to have. It's why you see Microsoft constantly attacked. You would think Microsoft, with as much money as they have, that they would be able to address these things, but they have such a gigantic attack surface. And that's one of the things I think we learned here, is that the telecom sector was really vulnerable. And even if you don't blame the victim, it's really possible to be hacked and to not have any culpability and for it not to be your fault. I think in this case, just in my broader assessment, I think there was fault to be found on all sides. How much individuals want to blame one side more than the other, I'm going to leave to them. But I think that there were real faults that I think our stories outlined that pointed to culpability on the telecom sector side of things and on the government side of things.
And what are you seeing going forward here in terms of both real substantive change and aspirational change?
Yeah, I think there is the sort of vague things that Kristi Noem has said about how to get CISA back on mission. We haven't heard yet about how she wants to do that. Certainly, we've talked about the things that are sidelines that are not really part of what our story was about. But you and I have talked about those things. But in terms of how do you get CISA back on mission such that if something like Salt Typhoon might happen again, how do you avoid it happening? We don't have a plan for that yet. We haven't heard that plan yet on the government side. Certainly, there have been people who have advocating for strengthening things like the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. We'll see whether that happens at all, but that's another idea that's out there about how that this could have been helped. I think we're going to be hearing more from Congress on that and more from Congress on their investigation. There's a House Homeland Security investigation into what really went wrong with Salt Typhoon. So I think that could produce more ideas. I think we're kind of still at the idea stage, frankly. If you think about this, the public first learned about this back in September, but some of this we didn't really get a real sense of some of the scope of this until closer to December. And then we had an administration change, and there's been some chaos there, to say the least, above and beyond, I think, the usual kind of administration change where you have turnover of personnel and you have turnover of ideas. So I think we're behind on that for reasons that are both valid and perhaps questionable. So I think that we'll see more once some of those cards start to play out on things like Congress, its investigation, what the administration decides to do. I think that there's more to be seen there I think like you talked about, it's more at the aspirational phase than the deliberative, this is what we're going to do now.
Tim Starks is senior reporter at CyberScoop. We will have a link to his in-depth reporting on Salt Typhoon in our show notes. Do check it out. It is worth your time. Tim Starks, thanks so much for taking the time for us today.
Thank you big time, Dave.
And for our last story, Victoria's Secret is making headlines this week, and not for reasons you might suspect, and not for a new collection. Everybody, just settle down. The retailer has taken its U.S. website offline and paused some in-store services after a major cybersecurity breach was discovered over the Memorial Day weekend. Online shoppers were met with a black screen and a brief message confirming the incident as the company scrambles to investigate. With digital sales making up nearly a third of its revenue, this outage isn't just inconvenient, it is quite costly, with shares in the company dropping nearly 7%. So far, Victoria's Secret hasn't revealed whether customer data was compromised, fueling plenty of speculation on that front. Experts say that the timing follows a familiar pattern, with cybercriminals often striking when staff coverage is light. Victoria's Secret says its team is working around the clock to restore operations. And as one viral song goes, I know Victoria's Secret. Well, now hackers might too. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. N2K's senior producer is Alice Carruth. Our CyberWire producer is Liz Stokes. We're mixed by Trey Hester, with original music and sound design by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. And I'm Maria Varmazes in for Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.
And now, a word from our sponsor, ThreatLocker. Keeping your system secure shouldn't mean constantly reacting to threats. ThreatLocker helps you take a different approach by giving you full control over what software can run in your environment. If it's not approved, it doesn't run. Simple as that. It's a way to stop ransomware and other attacks before they start, without adding extra complexity to your day. See how ThreatLocker can help you lock down your environment at www.threatlocker.com.